Helena, welcome back. Good to see you again and have you back here with me on Forked, where we are going to talk about all the food politics in the Maha age. And I just want to point out for those of you who are not watching this on video that there's a really great painting behind Helena of sailors maybe getting washed overboard. I can't quite tell what that is. Maybe
It's
you can
an
tell me what that
epic.
is.
It's just an epic ship scene.
Okay,
I
pretty
think
good.
it's a fishing boat. Yeah.
All right, why don't we get to it? So, as you know, every episode of Forked, we start off with something that we call the double take, which is something within the food system and within food politics that is so crazy or shocking that you do a double take. And in this case, I like to think of it as the Otto von Bismarck version of the double take. Now, he's famous for saying laws are like sausages. It's no good to be there while they're being made. And what that relates to is the passage of the now one big beautiful act and the flip-flop on her vote by Senator Lisa Murkowski as it relates and the carve out related to snap cut. So maybe, Helena, you could do a better job telling people what I'm talking about with that.
Yeah. So I feel like we've kind of emerged from the 4th of July sort of the fog of 4th of July holiday weekend. And now everyone is like, okay, what happened with this reconciliation bill? And I think one of the things that is sparking headlines right now is this idea that there were some special carve-outs in some of the SNAP provisions, clearly aimed at getting Senator Lisa Murkowski on board. And she really was the critical vote here, like to get the bill through. It was actually a tie, and Vice President J.D. Vance had to break the tie. So really squeaked through the Senate. And then passed the House by a couple of vote margin. So essentially what happened is that the original big, beautiful bill, or BBB, or whatever Trump has branded it, otherwise known as the budget package or the reconciliation package, the original provision in the Senate was to force states that had higher than a 6% error rate to pay for a portion of SNAP benefits. And the portion would range from anywhere from 5 to 15%. Now, the reason this is a big deal is throughout the entire food stamp or SNAP program history, the federal government has always picked up the whole tab for the benefits. So states and feds have always shared some of the admin costs, but the benefits are really, we're talking about a more than $100 billion program. This is a huge program that helps people afford groceries. So asking states to pick up some of the actual benefit costs, we're talking about tens, sometimes hundreds of millions, even billions of dollars of additional costs on them. Anti-hunger advocates are really worried that this will make states cut people from the program or even drop out of the program altogether because they just can't come up with the money. So this 6%
Let me just cut in here
yeah,
for a second. So, all right. So let's just break this down for people who don't quite know what you're talking about. So first of all, yeah, there are the cuts to SNAP and the way it's going to be restructured, which means that the federal government is going to pay less and they're going to push more costs onto the state. But these error rates, that's a separate issue.
No,
right?
The error rates are actually what determines how much a state will pay. That's why it matters. So this 6% threshold was what was set in the bill. Okay, so, and the error rate, we should explain, the error rate is like administrative mistakes. It's not fraud. It's like a state isn't quite accurately determining the benefit for an individual household. And often this will happen because the household situation might have changed slightly and the paperwork wasn't updated. So the accuracy of the benefit that they are entitled to just might be off a little bit. Sometimes they're overpayments. And it includes
overpay. Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
It includes overpayments and underpayments. They're mostly overpayments, but, and we're talking we just got the rates for 2024. The overall average SNAP error rate was almost 11% in
well, let's talk about that for a second, if we can.
Yeah.
Because if you look at these error rates over time, prior to basically the first Trump administration, the rates were on average pretty low. Mostly they were under 6%, this 6% threshold. They went up during the first Trump administration. Then they really went up during the pandemic. Then they started to slightly come back down in 2024. Do you have a sense of what are we talking about here? What was the change? It's just that many more people came on to SNAP, or
there's a few things happening here. First, there was a period of time where SNAP error rates were artificially low. So states were doing some funny math to get lower error rates than they actually had. And there was a bit of a reckoning over that. That was a whole other saga. We also had the pandemic. A lot more people, are on SNAP. And at the same time, states were really strapped for people to, the administrators that you need, the actual staff that you need to process all this stuff. So when you get short staffed and you have more people on the program, you're going to have more mistakes. It's like not, rocket science. And in some cases, like Alaska has been really, really bad there. And this is where we get to Senator Murkowski. Alaska's error rate was almost 25% in 2024.
Worst in the country.
Worst in the country by quite a bit. And so the 6% threshold was supposed to be if a state can get to below 6%, they're not going to have to pay part of the benefit. So that's the incentive is for the state, and this would be by about 2028. So the incentive in the bill is supposed to be to get states to drive down their mistakes. Now, there's some people who worry they'll go back to doing some funny math because there's a huge financial incentive to get that number down.
Let's talk about that in a second, but let's talk about Murkowski specifically for a minute.
So what they did... go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, you go ahead.
So the 6% was like the magic number, and the Senate staff were very we wanted to have a number where if states got to this number, the feds were going to pick up 100% of the benefit. So basically this cost share idea that is so controversial, that anti-hunger advocates are so worried about, that would sort of almost take it off the table, because if states could get below this number, it would just be the feds would pick up 100% of the SNAP benefit. So what ended up happening at the very last minute to help get Senator Murkowski's vote is to delay that cost share provision, and they raised the bar. They raised the threshold to, I think it was 13. There was some weird math equation, but basically
13.3%.
Yeah, basically the highest error rate states now will be delayed along with Alaska. So it created this weird two-tier system where actually the states with the worst error rates are going to get a break. And so... And that's because you can't write in a reconciliation bill only Alaska doesn't have to do this, right? They had to create a threshold, and that's sort of how it worked out. And so it's now we're getting to the double take. We're having these, mostly Democrats saying this is really hypocritical. If you're actually trying to incentivize the states, this is not the way to do it. You've created this weird... two-tier system.
You've an incentive for them to increase their error rates. I also think, and this is where we talk about hypocrisy, it's a little bit hypocritical for the Democrats too, because we've seen these kinds of things from a senator like Murkowski before, right? So here you have Lisa Murkowski. She's from Alaska. By the standards of the day, she is something of a moderate Republican. And in the run-up to the passage of the bill, she just kept talking about how, I can't decide, it's an agonizing choice, all of these things about the bill. And then eventually, and this is, again, the sausage, she changes her mind about this, much the same way that Jill Manchin and Kristen Sinema did when Biden was in office. So these things do happen, but I think it's worth reading what Murkowski had to say when she eventually changed her vote. She's quoted, I think it's in the New York Times. "Do I like this bill?" Ms. Murkowski said. "No, but I tried to take care of Alaska's interests. But I know that in many parts of the country, there are Americans that are not going to be advantaged by this bill. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is what's passing for moderate as we go through these political processes at this moment."
Yeah, I saw a lot of heat about this on social media. People saying, if you have to carve out your state from a bill, if you believe that it is harmful, why are you imposing it on the rest of the country? There was a lot of that. And there was a lot of I think there was just a lot of it almost comes back to that you mentioned that, it's normal to flip votes in the middle of the night and make these carve outs and or make these compromises or these deals or whatever. But this one felt, I think, particularly craven just because of how much attention has been on this bill, and really how Democrats, I think, are pretty effectively juxtaposing its SNAP and Medicaid cuts to try to pay for some of the tax cuts, which, by the way, are not paid for. It adds $3 trillion to the debt.
To the deficit.
So, yeah. So it's it's like
Well, let's think about
okay,
let's think
like,
about that
I don't know.
cravenness.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let's think about that, because if you're in Murkowski's shoes, I think the prologue or the context is Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema, and both of them are out of politics today. Both of them stood in the way of the Democrats with the Inflation Reduction Act and got changes made to it, and they got their own sweeteners, and now they're both out. I'm not saying I'm not. I mean, look, I'm not a prognosticator. I don't know. I don't have a crystal
Mhm.
ball about Lisa Murkowski's political future, but I don't think it's
Mhm.
great when you do that so publicly. Um,
Well, I don't know,
so
it only
yeah,
matters in it only matters in Alaska, and I haven't looked at the Alaska headlines, but they're probably pretty clear on, like, the fact that she did, get the state a break on SNAP, but, um, I the reconciliation process, I think, in general is, like, kind of a bad sign that we have to keep using it. Like, even for the Inflation Reduction Act, I mean, it is a workaround, right, of a dysfunctional Congress. And even when we were getting the reporters were getting briefed on the agriculture portions of the or the reconciliation package, the staff were even like, we don't like reconciliation. Like, we want to do like a regular farm bill, like which is normally where we deal with SNAP and farm policy and all this stuff. And, you know, but this is what it is. This is the train that's moving. This is what's happening. And so, like, I think that's, why all of this stuff got attached to it. But it is a sign of dysfunction that we're even using reconciliation. And by the way, speaking of the Inflation Reduction Act, a number of those provisions were undone in this bill. And so, again, just going back to like the lack of function, and it's just really not how I think policymaking is supposed to work, where you do this huge thing and then you undo it a couple years later and you undo it by one vote or a tie. I mean, and of course, reconciliation lets you do much more partisan things, which is why they were able to make the biggest cuts we've ever seen to SNAP and the biggest cuts we've ever seen to healthcare or Medicaid specifically.
I just want to say one last thing about Murkowski, and then let's move on to our next segment. The thing about there was a narrative around Murkowski in the media in the run up to the vote that maybe she was going to vote against this bill, right? And
Hmm.
I think that is a genuinely false narrative. There was no chance. I don't. I mean, I don't have any inside
I don't know.
information, but I
Collins
mean,
voted against it, but she's
well,
up
but
for
Collins voted
reelection.
against it in a way that she could, right? Once Murkowski voted yes, it didn't matter how Collins voted, right? And they're in different circumstances. I do not think there was any meaningful chance that this bill was not going to go through. Maybe there would have been changes to it, but
Hmm.
that's the nature. When you talk about the dysfunction, that is the nature of it. It's not necessarily using
Hmm.
reconciliation or not using reconciliation. It's passing legislation that is potentially unpopular nationally,
It's
but
very
very
unpopular.
popular with
Yeah.
the base. Yeah. So I just think
Well, that's an
that to
interesting
me,
question. I don't know how popular it is with the base. I mean, the polling on this bill is quite bad for Republicans, and
yeah,
I think right now the conventional wisdom is they're going to pay a political price for it. Some of the changes don't kick in until a lot of the changes I think don't kick in until after the midterms, which I'm sure was sort of intentional. But
shocking event that they
we'll
did it that
see.
way.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is probably going to be a political price, and there often is for these big bills. Like, I mean, I
Yeah.
was thinking back to like the Affordable Care Act, which was passed via reconciliation,
Yep.
and that was a really rough political time too. I think it's a little bit more popular in retrospect if people know what it is. Like, if you explain some of the provisions, right? Like, most people don't know like what was the Affordable Care Act, but if you explain like, pre-existing conditions or some of the, expanded Medicaid, some of the pieces of it, I think they're more popular in
They like
retrospect. But
those. They like having
there's a
health
lot
insurance.
of there's a
Yeah.
lot of there is a lot of difficulty, I think, in messaging this stuff, especially now when it's so decentralized and you have to like do
Yeah.
messaging on social. And it's like really, I think it's really hard to do. Um, it's really hard to
All right,
get.
so
I
let's
mean,
jump on to our next part.
yeah.
And this is our forks and knives segment, which is basically just a look at the status quo of what's happening in food politics. And I think this one's pretty obvious. The status quo is the passage of the
Hmm.
big, beautiful bill, now act. And I just want to point out before we jump into it too much, here is this one big, beautiful act, right? That's the name. It was signed by Donald Trump on July 4th. the Independence Day, right? So
Mhm.
here, there's a lot of stuff with people talking about Trump as playing four-dimensional chess and being highly strategic. Maybe that's true. Maybe that's not true. But that in and of itself, that name and that time shows you this is a guy that's not messing around when it comes to politics. So let's jump into it. I think it's worth
I
us talking.
No,
Yeah,
I
go ahead.
think that that point is really important. It is so clear to me, and I think to a lot of people who follow this stuff, that President Trump cares a lot more about the politics than he does the policy. He'll kind of like let some of this, some of the idea that you impose work requirements on Medicaid or SNAP, these are boilerplate Republican ideas that, Paul Ryan was trying to get these through. I mean, these are old school Republican ideas. And I think Trump himself seems to care much more about the optics of like getting a big thing done, signing it on July 4th, and is much less concerned with like the policy details, which is just sort of a different scenario. Like, I think usually when presidents are trying to get these big packages done, they're extremely into the details. That is not what we hear from
That's not
President
Trump.
Trump.
Yeah.
That's not.
So
Yeah.
let's talk about the bill itself for a second, just so we can catch up
Yeah.
a little bit. And I don't know if you have this at your fingertips, but do we know right now? Well, first of all, we know, or we've read, that this bill, the cuts to healthcare
Hmm.
and to SNAP, are the largest in history.
Yeah.
This is
That's
a
true.
genuine precedent
Hmm.
shatterer of a bill.
Yeah.
The other thing that I wonder if you know is like what is the final tally on SNAP cuts? I mean, the number was a
Yeah.
moving target,
It was.
reconciliation. Where did it land?
So I believe that it landed at 186 billion over 10.
Okay.
So that had come down somewhat. We were closer to 300 billion in the House version. That is over 10 years. So it's, I think, maybe about a 20% cut ish. That's rough to SNAP spending over a decade. So really significant in terms of the overall, just overall spending for SNAP. And there's a few ways that they achieve these savings. I think the most important one is the expanding work requirements for older adults. So I think it's the age between 55 and 64 will now be subject to work requirements, which means you have to show that you're working or in training or some other similar program for 20 hours a week. But really, that's like the paperwork, the admin, and every state will do that differently. What we have
I mean,
seen
we should point out
generally,
that the resources for the states to do that admin is part of the cuts. So you're adding the paperwork and you're cutting the money from the federal
yeah.
government to
So
help
yeah,
do the bureaucracy of it. So
so the
sorry to interrupt.
yeah, so that is part of the bill too, which I think that's one of the earlier provisions that kicks in, is that so historically states and the feds have shared 50% of the admin costs. So it's just a split down the middle of whatever it cost, the cost to the state to administer SNAP. And this bill shifts that 75-25 onto the states. So the states are already going to have to pick up more of the cost, and that is coming at a really hard time because a lot of states are already, first of all, a lot of them have to balance their budgets. So anytime you're taking away federal money in this way, like, it has to come from somewhere else. So that's just
Constitutionally,
and
many states are required
yes,
to
yep,
balance their budget, unlike the federal government, which can do whatever it
yes,
wants.
yes. So that is a big deal. The admin costs. The What we know about work requirements is, I think the ideal of work requirements is that they encourage work. They encourage people to, if they don't have employment, to seek employment so they can keep their Medicaid and keep their SNAP. If they don't have, in this case, I think it's dependents under the age of 14. So if you have kids that are under 14, if you have dependents, then you're not subject to this, but it's really the older people, like 55 to 64, we're increasing the age that would be subject to work requirements. And what that means is if you aren't working 20 hours or you can't show that you're working 20 hours a week, you can only get SNAP benefits for 90 days in a 3-year period. So it's a very short time period where you can get those benefits. What we know about these is that ideally, I think the argument for them is they're going to promote work. We have just not seen that play out when these are implemented. They're really good at getting people off the program because it's another administrative hurdle. They reduce the rolls for sure, but we just have not seen evidence that this increases labor and participation or earnings for the folks who have been dropped. And so it's going to
I want to point
reduce
out
the
one
cost
thing.
of SNAP
Yeah, yeah,
by cutting people from SNAP. And it's a little bit hard to predict how many people.
yeah.
There's definitely millions of people that are going to be subject to this new work requirement. There's going to be households that lose SNAP, and there'll be people who, are still eligible, but just like can't figure out how to navigate, meeting the requirement. The other thing in this bill is that it actually is going to subject a lot of people who were in that 18 to 54 age bracket that right now is supposed to be subject to these 20-hour-a-week work requirements, but a lot of states have been waiving those. This bill really clamps down and makes it a lot more difficult for states to do that. So there's going to be folks that are in that younger age bracket who have not had to deal with this, who are going to have to deal with this going forward. So a lot of administrative burden there for states, and then a lot of people who are going to lose access to SNAP. The other
I just want to
thing
point
we
out one
talked
thing.
about earlier is the
Yeah,
cost share.
yeah,
That's the other major way
yeah.
that this bill saves money, because based on the 2024 error rates, 44 states, if you were to just do this right now, 44 states would have error rates over 6%. So that's a lot. And depending on how bad their error rates are, they could go from having to pick up the tab 5% to 15%, and it varies, but they don't have that much time to get those error rates down to avoid having to pay those costs.
So it is what it seems like. It is an effort at the federal level to kick many, many people off of the rolls of SNAP. And I just want to point out one thing,
And
is we're
Medicaid.
talking
The
about,
same work
and
requirements
well,
will apply to Medicaid. Yeah.
right. And that's the point I wanted to make. So we're talking, this is a food policy and food politics podcast, but you can't separate food policy from healthcare easily. And I want to quote, this is a report from KFF, which is, I like to think of them as the artist formerly known as the Kaiser Family Foundation. And they say that the majority, 78% of people who received SNAP benefits in 2022, which is the most recent data that they had, were covered by Medicaid, including 18% who were covered by both Medicaid and Medicare. So we're talking about really talking about, in a lot of ways, the same pool of people being
Yep.
cut from both directions. That's why, and I want to toot our own horn here a little bit, Helena. Why does it matter to follow food policy and food politics? It's because it's at the center of everything that's happening in this country. People
Yeah.
tend to think of insurance, healthcare maybe being more important, but they really are one and the same thing, right?
Yeah. And we have seen way more focus on Medicaid,
Yeah,
which is, I think goes to
it's
back
more
what you were just
popular.
saying.
Yeah,
Um, I think we just tend to think of healthcare as a more pressing thing, and I get it. It is like very important to have health insurance like that or coverage under Medicaid. It's huge, but the SNAP cuts are going to be really widely felt, and also they are going to I think affect people more quickly. In terms of just like the impact of it, you may not realize that you've lost your Medicaid coverage until you try to go to the doctor. But the SNAP requirements changing will affect people a lot more quickly because SNAP is a monthly program. And so, we'll have to see how this all plays out. I think some states will do more to make sure that their participants in their SNAP programs can stay on the program, like helping, there's a way to design all these systems to be like easier to use or harder to
yeah.
use. Harder to use is a great way to kick people off. Like I was reading about the Medicaid work requirements that were tried in a couple of states, including Georgia, and their website would just be down like a lot,
Yeah.
for updates. Well, that I don't know if that was intentional. I'm not saying it was, but like that's a really good way to just people just give up. They're like, well, this isn't working. And they had to check in like monthly to stay on Medicaid. And so, that's just a really big administrative, I struggle to
The
like get the
cliche.
kids' paperwork
Yeah,
for school. Like when that's once
yeah.
a year. It's not a
The
small
cliche
thing.
about the states being a laboratory for innovation, right? Like you've heard that before. And
And they
we're going to
are.
find
And
out.
they are. Yeah.
We're going to find out if they really are. That is about to happen.
Yeah. Yeah. The other
You
thing I
know,
want to
the,
mention is that, this bill also completely cuts funding for SNAP Education.
yeah,
And this is about a $500 million pot of funding for nutrition education programs, so like cooking classes and different programs that help low-income families like make healthier choices, learn
Right.
how to cook on a budget, things like that. And
Let's talk about why
as
that's important. Just
yeah.
SNAP-Ed itself, I mean, because
So
I
it's
think what's interesting about SNAP-Ed is that you have SNAP, which gives people access to food, right? They
mhm.
they have they're allowed to go and buy food as part of the program. But you also want to do sustainability, right? You want to create an environment where people don't have to remain potentially on SNAP benefits permanently. And one of the ways you can do that is by teaching them and training them in how to seek better nutrition and how to cook and all the things that SNAP-Ed is supposed to do. So it is in its own way somewhat designed to get people off of SNAP. It's but through capacity building rather than through driving them out through attrition.
well, so there's a couple of different avenue programs here. So SNAP Ed is mostly aimed at trying to improve diet quality among SNAP participants. And that's, so that's funding nonprofits to do, or food banks or whatever the group is to do programs like a really classic SNAP education program would be, SNAP participants can go to a cooking class. They learn how to cook on a budget, cook healthfully, like incorporate lots of fruits and vegetables. They might learn how to cook with more frozen items or things that are more cost effective. And it's designed to improve diet quality. And one of the reasons why this is so um, baffling, this cut, is that it comes amid Make America Healthy Again, and this
Yeah.
really big focus in terms of rhetoric from Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and so many of these advocates for MAHA. It just seems really hypocritical to cut the program that actually promotes healthier eating within SNAP. Now, it should be noted that the MAHA policy right now is much more focused on restrictions. So the administration is approving, they've now approved 6 states to do certain SNAP restrictions. They're mostly going after like candy and soda, so actually dropping products out of SNAP. But a lot of people who work in the food space and work in nutrition are like, you have to work on this other piece of it, which is access and cooking and knowledge and all of that. Now, critics of SNAP Ed would say, look, it's not working, right? Like the country's really unhealthy. It's really hard to measure if these programs are working. And so this was an easy cut, I think, for Republicans to make. There isn't a huge constituency around SNAP education. Now, SNAP Employment and Training, which is another SNAP E program, SNAP ENT, is designed to do like training and employment programs to help people get off of SNAP or increase their earnings. One of the big problems with SNAP ENT, though, is uneven funding and capacity in the states. And so it's one of those things that sounds good and I think has like really good intentions, but when it comes to, with so much of this, with school meals, with SNAP, with whatever, it always comes down to money, right? You can
It does.
have great intentions, but if the money is not there and the resources are not there to actually do these things, then it's sort of meaningless. And I think nutrition education would be one of them. SNAP ENT would be one of them. It's a good question. I'm not sure what, if anything, this bill did on SNAP ENT, but that has in the past been one of the focuses of folks who really want to promote work through SNAP, like looking at SNAP
Right.
ENT. So,
All right, so why don't we switch gears here a little bit and get into our final section, which is the good vibes, right? So this is something happening out there in food land that is at least in some way, a cause for optimism. And I think what we should talk about this time, there's a lot of conversation, a lot of debate about RFK Jr. and the MAHA Commission going very hard against food companies over synthetic food dyes. But so far, it's been a lot of light, but not a lot of heat coming from the federal level. And what
mhm.
we have seen, in fact, and what I'd like you to talk about is what's happening at the states and why that's important.
Yeah. So in the last couple weeks, we've seen a ton of major food companies announce that they're getting rid of synthetic food dyes or they're phasing them out. The timelines vary, but a lot of them are by the end of 2027. And the reason why the end of 2027 is interesting is because in January 2028, West Virginia has a ban on the most common synthetic food dyes. And so food companies are trying to get in front of that. You can't, the way our food system works, the way food is distributed, you cannot just make products. You cannot just make Jell-O and M&M's special for West Virginia. you got to do it for the whole country because that's just how it works. And you can't just disobey the law in West Virginia. So a lot of these companies are scrambling to get this out by 2027. Of course, RFK Jr. is praising these companies for doing this and saying, really trying to take a victory lap. But RFK Jr. and the Trump administration had actually asked these companies to take dyes out by the end of 2026. So, okay, yeah, there's a year difference, but it really goes to show you that regulations and laws are the hammer or the carrot or at the end, right? Like that is the timeline that these companies view as real, not that they were asked to do this by the Trump administration. Not a single dye has been banned. Like FDA has taken no actions against these. The one thing they've done is they have approved a couple of alternative colors. So I think they're technically considered naturally sourced colors. There's a couple that have been approved. Even the dyes that RFK Jr. said we were going to ban within no time at all, that are barely used, have been mostly not used by food companies, those haven't even been banned. So the feds really have not taken any action here, but a lot of it is the rhetoric, and they're trying to put pressure on the food industry. And the food industry, what I'm seeing, is really planning to comply with West Virginia's ban. So the states are playing a really big role here. Texas
but it's not that easy,
recently
right?
passed.
Go ahead.
I was going to say Texas, of all places, recently passed a warning label bill where they're actually going to mandate front of pack warnings on food packages or food products that contain ingredients that have been banned in other countries. So it'll say like warning, it's something like, warning, this product contains something that has been deemed not great for human consumption by Europe or Australia or whatever. Texas did that. And so we're now facing another state policy where the rest of the country is going to have to figure out how to either comply or take this to court. I mean, there's going to be a period of time where everyone's going to figure out how this is going to land. But the states really are taking actions here in a bipartisan way, and yet we've still seen almost nothing from the feds. It's just like I
want to talk about two things that relate to that. Okay, so the first one, you mentioned, you're surprised. Oh, look, Texas is regulating these kinds of things, and I think one of the things that's really interesting is the nature. Or regulating anything, right? One of the things that's interesting to me is, what is the nature of this movement politically? When we talk about the MAHA movement, we talk about RFK Jr., we oftentimes think that it's related, not surprisingly, to food and nutrition. But it's not quite that simple. I was reading a report from Farm Doc, this organization. They did a survey of a bunch of people about why they did or didn't support the MAHA movement. Mm-hmm. The main thing that emerged from it is basically it is a partisan movement. The people who most likely support it, they voted for Trump. They consider themselves very, very conservative. That's why they identify with MAHA. The other thing that's really kind of interesting about it is you drive down a little bit into it a little bit more. People are more so people who say, for example, go to a farmer's market regularly, right? They are very supportive of MAHA and its goals. But people who work in the food system, let's say you own a farm, right? Or used to own a farm, or have family that own a farm, or if you get benefits like SNAP, they are very much opposed to it. So when you whittle it all away and you look at why Texas is doing it, it sort of makes some sense. I mean, first of all, it's just a Trump policy. That's it. People support Trump voters, Trump states. They support his policies, and along with it is this weird sort of bougie farmers market component about not wanting petroleum-based artificial dyes and not wanting to use seed oils, right? I mean, that's really what we're talking about, right? It's
so politics. Yeah. I mean, I've taken a look at that survey too. I think if you use the term "Make America Healthy Again," that is probably a more partisan phrasing, because of just it echoes "Make America Healthy Again." Yeah. But I actually disagree. I think it's like the of the food policies within MAHA, there is incredible bipartisan support for the ideas. The vaccine stuff, not so much. That's really, really. It's not even popular among Republicans. It's like a low or high 30s. It's not like this overwhelming overwhelmingly supported Republican position. But the food ideas, so like banning synthetic food dyes, cracking down on food additives, mandating they teach nutrition in med schools, getting rid of or reducing processed foods in schools. These are like 60, 70, 80% approved on out of both Republicans and Democrats. And
It
that
sounds good to
is,
me. When you put it
it's
like
this
that, it sounds
weird,
good to
well,
me.
but that, yeah, I think if you get into the food parts of it, like what are the
Yeah,
actual parts, it's really popular. And I think
yeah,
that's one of the reasons why the Trump administration has talked more about the food stuff, because it is really popular. It's really popular with moms and parents and low information voters who are just like, yeah, that sounds great. Let's do that. Like, I'm tired of being pestered about bright blue candy. Like, get it out, right? Like, I think these ideas are popular. And if you look at the states, what they're doing is really bipartisan. I mean, in
yeah.
Texas, it was Democrats and Republicans. Now, when you go to Washington, it is more partisan because it is so associated with the Trump administration, and Democrats so far are like not
They're not on
really
board. They're not voting
engaging on
for
this. Yeah.
it. Yeah,
But some of the ideas like cracking down on food additives or like increasing oversight, I mean, those have been pushed by more progressive consumer groups and food advocates for decades, right? They've wanted this to happen. And so if the Trump administration actually gets something like that done, which again, questions, where is the
yeah,
federal policy making? I've seen none of it so far. If they actually get that done, it'll be really interesting to see how those groups respond, because these are,
yeah.
ideas that they've been pushing for such a long time. And it's just kind of something no one saw coming, that it might be the the second term of the Trump administration that might have the opportunity to get it done. It is. I was recently talking to Sam Cass about this, who ran, Let's Move under Michelle Obama. And his quote was something like, I feel like I'm living an upside down world. Like, it just is sort of doesn't make sense compared to where we were even a few years ago, where Republicans would have just carte blanche hated all this stuff or been opposed to it.
Let's go back to the dyes for a second, because one of the things that's interesting about it is you do have this regulation at the state level taking place, but it's not. I'm curious to hear how you think this is all going to play out. Because on the one hand, it's good to say to regulate this and to get rid of these dyes if you're able to, but it's not that easy to actually change the food products themselves. I was reading an article in the Times about it today, and they were talking with a guy who is what they say, the fourth generation owner of Spangler Candy, which makes Dum Dums, which are still out there
Mm-hmm.
somewhere, right? And he was saying how difficult it is to replace artificial synthetic dyes with
Yeah.
natural dyes. It's going to cost more money. There's not enough of them. And this is the part that I thought was really great. He said that that there are ways with some natural ingredients like beets to replace the synthetic dyes, but they don't always do that well. Sometimes they're not good in the light and the heat. And this is the kicker here, they taste like beets. Is that really what we want for our candy in this country?
The thing about it, having covered the food industry for 15 years, is the food industry always says they can't do things, and then they figure out a way to do it. And it's always hard to tell, is this the one thing that they
Yeah,
really can't do in time? I think we'll see. I think the bigger companies are going to figure it out. Like,
yeah,
but the colors are not going to be as bright. I mean, that is true. Like, I think if you look at brightly colored things like, sour candies or Mike and Ike's or red vines or whatever, I don't know that those are going to be as bright as they
yeah,
are now. And we'll see if their consumers care. If they, in the past, consumers have cared, but it's been because, one company has done it. Like, they took dyes out. I think General Mills was one of them. And then people complained, and they're looking
and
around, and
then did it. Yeah,
all the other
yeah,
cereals are still brightly colored. So it'll be an interesting, I guess, experiment to see if everyone has to do it at the same time. Do consumers sort of accept this is the new reality and like move forward? Or is there going to be a lot of, really angry TikToks about this? I don't know.
states are the laboratory of innovation. We will see.
Well,
All
and
right.
I will say the
Yeah,
one downside though to having states do this, and this is where you get to like the idea of like good government and sort of good policy making. There is a deep concern that the more you let states do these policies, it's going to be much more populist in the outcome, right? They're going to do things that are popular. It's not going to follow like what is the preponderance of scientific evidence. It's not going to
yeah,
be, you know, if you looked at FDA or USDA, even when people would get really mad at them, they, for better or for worse, they had to show their evidence. They had to like have some, real science behind whatever ban, or, even like banning trans fat took a really, really long time, way too long. But they have to, show a scientific docket of like, this is why we're banning this. This is, the health effects. States don't have to do that. They just, the legislature just votes. And, the upside is it's really quick. It's responsive to maybe what consumers and Americans want. And maybe that's the system we want. Maybe that is what consumers are asking for, or maybe that is a more popular way of doing things. But it is certainly a departure from what we've had, which is a really slow, really
measured,
thoughtful. Huge dockets,
right.
or, with all these studies in it. And so it does make all of this more political, because they're political bodies, they're legislatures that are making these decisions. And so I think we're going to see some really popular and probably really good stuff come out of it. And then we're going to see some really bizarre and weird, and we'll probably see some bad policy too.
Well, let's leave it at that, because that's always the case. We'll see, right? We never know.
We'll see.
So I think we should wrap it up on that. Helena, why don't you tell everybody out there about your really cool newsletter that you publish?
Yeah, so if you're interested in these issues, I write about food policy every week. You can sign up for free at foodfix.co, or just Google like Food Fix newsletter. You'll find it. Get on the email list. And yeah, there's so much going on right now. Never a dull moment. Like, everyone's opening the email right now, right? Like, everyone is reading it because they're like, wow, there's a lot going on.
All right. Thanks a lot, Helena. We'll talk in 2 weeks.
Thank you. See you soon.